Hello, friends, fans, and dairy products of all ages. This is Cheese of Ages here, and I'm making another one of my videos in which I've seen or read or been involved in a discussion of something on the internet that I feel is stupid, and so I should pick it apart. Now, on this particular occasion, it's not necessarily stupid. It's just, I believe, misguided, and I don't agree with it. And this is brought on by a video put out by a far more talented, charismatic, intelligent, and better looking YouTuber than me, GBay99. Now that I've gotten the ass kissing out of the way, what video am I talking about? Well, of course, if you've seen the title of the video, I'm talking about his autofill video, in which he's complaining about autofill being enabled in all queues. So go ahead and watch that video if you want to, before you hear my points, because I'm going to be going under the impression that you've seen the video. So go watch it, and I'm going to assume you're back now from watching it. Anyway, several of the points he makes I don't agree with, but let's hit briefly on something that I do agree a little bit with, and that's the sentiment that at lower elos, it might not necessarily be completely required to turn autofill on all the time. I mean, queue times of 5 minutes or less aren't necessarily worth slicing half of the time off of at the sacrifice of match quality. But also, for the majority of the video, he blows the problems with autofill way out of proportion. For one, he acts like role select seals the deal, that there's no way to get out of it, you're forced to play that position. He pretty much says that at least one time, maybe two or three. Let's make one thing perfectly clear. It's not impossible to switch out of a role you've been autofilled into. There's nothing keeping you from talking in the chat and trading roles. I've done it 3 times in the past week. Not out of it, but into it. The new queuing system does not in any way drastically decrease the likelihood of someone saying, "Oh, you are bad at support, or you don't have a support room page, or you haven't played any support champions really. I'll play for you because this is a ranked game and I want to win. I'll trade you for support." There's nothing in the new queuing system that makes it where people are less likely to do that. Oh, well, they queued for specific roles, and they want to play those roles. They got that role. Why would they trade it? That's no different than the old queuing system, in which they came in there wanting to play particular roles that did not include support. They got a higher pick order than you, and thus got the opportunity to pick the role if they managed to fight for it successfully. So it's no different. They're even less likely to give up the role that they had to actually potentially had to fight to get. The lower the elo you got in the old queuing system, the less likely people were to respect the pick order rule, because that was not a formally enforced thing by Riot. Now, the new queuing system is a formally enforced thing by Riot. You're given the role you get, one of your 2 roles if you're not autofilled. So you didn't have to fight for it, you secured it. It's there. No effort on your part. Unless you were autofilled in a previous game, which in the old queue system, if you were last pick in a previous game, or didn't get your preferred role in previous games, same scenario still exists. You were still less likely to give it up because, hey, I finally got it. But these situations are pretty much identical, if not more relaxed, because you're more likely to not be forced into multiple positions because of pick order. You're Instead of wanting two particular roles and being potentially forced into three different ones, you're wanting two roles and potentially being forced into one. That's already superior, even with autofill enabled. Even with the likelihood of that one bottom role happening more of the time. Even if you are last pick more often, that means you're like not third or fourth pick as much. You're never third or fourth pick. You're always first or second pick unless you're last pick. What's the problem here? There's give and takes, which segues into my next point. Role select simply does not function how you want it to. You can't just queue up for only the two roles you want and only get those two roles and also have good match queue timers. It just simply doesn't work. Very few people are going to queue for support. Thus, the more people that queue for support as their secondary, they're more likely to get it. It's simply fact. If you put support as your secondary, you're almost always going to get it. Therefore, fewer people queue for support as secondary. So pretty much the only person queuing for support is a support main. Or somebody that's like, oh, I'm willing to play support today. So there's very few supports. The system breaks itself. It just simply will not function and have good queue timers by itself. Now again, calling back to an earlier point, I agree that maybe it's not totally necessary at lower elos where like match queues are pretty liberal. I've had, at my low MMR right now, I've had queue times of upwards of 10 minutes occasionally, and usually averaging around 6 or 7 minutes. But yeah, sure, maybe it's not worth that trade of like 1 to 3 minutes of less time. Personally, I think it is. But personally, I don't care if I play support or not. So there's an example for you. I never queue a support secondary because I don't want to play support every game. But if somebody's like, oh, I don't want support, I'm willing to take it once in a while. The freaking role select simply and undeniably simply does not function without autofill. Ideally. And even comparing the two, you get autofilled once in a blue moon. To date, I've never been autofilled. Over the course of the past 10 games, I've never been autofilled, though I'm in a low MMR. I'm at a bigger issue at higher lows. So don't use my example case as like a definitive statement. You can either get autofilled occasionally, but never in important matches, and have decent queue times with people dodging as much as they did when they had last pick, or didn't get their primary role. Probably more dodges in the old system. Or you can go back to the old system and have more dodges and have less often get the role you want to play, because you are in the new queue system. You're either first or second pick. If you're not last pick, there's no third or fourth pick. It doesn't exist. Or you could go back to the system where there's a third or fourth pick. Do you want to have a 20, maybe at top most 30% chance of getting support, of getting a role you don't want to play at all? Or have an astronomically large chance of playing a role you don't like, because instead of one role, it's 3 that you don't want to play, and you're being queued into. But I'm sure his point wasn't that the old queuing system was better, even though he said that autofill is in some ways worse than the old queuing system, because he seems to be under the impression that people won't trade you roles. The system can tell what you're playing. So yeah. There's basically no reason that autofill is bad except that you occasionally have to play support. If somebody's not willing to trade, if nobody on the team, I'm using an example case here, if the person that got forced into support has no support rune pages, has never played supports, and says like, oh, I'm terrible at support, I don't play support barely at all, can somebody please trade me? If nobody on that team trades him, they do not deserve to win the game. I don't fucking care. They don't deserve to fucking win. If they're gonna force some motherfucker that can't play support to play support, they're like, okay, we make the decision to kill our bot lane, and now we're gonna complain because autofill killed us. We made the active decision to lop off one of the legs of our bot lane because we're not willing to compromise. Boo-hoo, Riot. Why'd you make us lose the game? Stop being a whiny bitch. Play support for that guy that can't play support. It's called, like, compromise. And it's not going to happen super frequently. You know? I mean, Jesus. I bet you a majority of the people in the game can play support, they just don't want to. It's not super complicated. At higher elos, being forced to play support is less of an issue, because support isn't that fucking complicated. I'm sure some people are going to argue, it's like, oh, you gotta know proper ward placement. You gotta like have certain champions that, use CC properly. You go have to tank for your team. You've got to do all of these things that everyone else on the map is also supposed to do, and practice all of these elementary aspects of the game that every role has to do. But it's support, so it's harder. I'll admit it's harder to do it a bit because you're expected to do it on less gold, and you're more required to ward than other people are seen as typically to be required. You're the team's primary warder. You have more of a responsibility to ward, even though everybody should ward. And you're also expected to protect this motherfucker. But several other roles are supposed to do that warding. All other roles are supposed to protect the team in some fashion, either by killing the enemy, or carrying the team, or providing CC. Every champion in the game has skill shots that do things that their team relies on to carry them through the game, including skill shot CCs. There are tanks in other roles that are supposed to protect the team. The functions of a support aren't only functions of a support. Other roles do the things mechanically required of the support. There's not some huge divide between what a support does and what any other position on the battlefield does, except maybe marksman. Marksman support is like a bit of a stretch, because typically ADCs don't have any CC, and they're not in charge of protecting anybody. They don't have the potential to protect anybody. They don't have any alliance skill shot CCs or things like that. But you know what I'm talking about. It's not if you're good at the game mechanically speaking, if you're a high elo player, you could play support at least passably well. That's what I'm saying. You'll probably be a rank or so below in a support skill, but it's not like you're going to run into a situation that's like, oh, I don't have rune pages that will work for this support role. I don't know how to play any support champions. I don't know how to play the mechanical functionalities that a support is required to do, even though several other roles on the battlefield are required to do these basic mechanical things that will function as in a support role's functionality. And I know there's other things that support's required to do. Poke in certain ways, then learn when to initiate and go in. There's different types of support, such as poke mages control things, kill lanes, tanks with varying levels of initiation and CC, and ways to play the game in different ways. congratulations, every role has those subtle variations. It's probably like not quite as drastic as supports can be, but it's not like, again, it's not like we're talking the Grand Canyon here. But I'm getting off point. You know what I'm talking about. At higher elos, people are going to be able to play support. So yeah, maybe I'm arguing that nobody will trade because, like, oh, you can do it fine, you know, it's just support, you know. But yeah, maybe that situation will occur more in higher elos where people are expected to just be able to make do. But still, if like somebody's like in the champion select asking you to trade, it's like, I am complete shit at support. I can't do it. Could somebody please trade with me? And nobody's willing to like do exactly what they were doing in the previous champion select, then they deserve to lose. There's nothing in the new role selection system that keeps people from trading roles. Nothing at all. Yet he's like several times brings up today it as if there was something there to do it. It's a simple fact of the matter is, you either got to put up with really long queue times, even at low elos. You got to deal with occasionally waiting 6 minutes for a match, which is fucking boring. Or you've got to occasionally, once in a blue moon, play support and try to talk your way out of it like you did before. You got to compromise, or you've got to like have this inferior version, or you got to go back to the old queuing system, which will fix everything wrong with queue timers, but be massively worse in every other aspect you're complaining about with autofill. Because there's no protections, because with autofill it's not on for important matches. The old queuing system, you are autofilled more often into roles you didn't want to play, and there was no way out of it in important matches. Unless you talked about it. So, either have this compromise, have really fucking long queue times, or go back to the old system, which was every problem you're having inflated at least 30%. I'm going to stick to queuing for 2 roles and occasionally getting one I didn't want to play, instead of wanting to play 2 roles and potentially getting 3 that I don't want to play. Howdy. This is Choose of Ages signing off.